introduce our speaker for today. So our speaker for today is Debbie Ziegelmeyer. So Debbie joined MUFON in 2000 and became a field investigator shortly after that. She's currently a MUFON Star Team investigator, Missouri State Director, a member of the MUFON Business Board of Directors, the Functional Director of Underwater Research and Recovery, a member of the Mars Team, a benefactor, a co-founder of the MUFON Dive Team, a PADI instructor, and small business owner in Imperial, Missouri. She's made multiple podcasts, conference, and TV appearances, including as a consultant on 2 episodes of Alien Highway, appeared on 2 episodes of Alaska Triangle, and appeared on the 2021 Discovery Plus series Roswell: The Final Verdict, and in 2024 on an episode of Ancient Aliens. In 2017, she was awarded both the Roswell Incident Excellence Award by the Roswell Daily Record and the MUFON Field Investigator of the Year. In 2023, Debbie was also awarded the MUFON Chapter of the Year Award for the state of Missouri. Most recently, Debbie appeared as a guest speaker and panelist at the 2024 MUFON Symposium in Dallas, Texas. So I'm really excited about this. I've known Debbie for several years. I feel like I probably know her better than she knows me because it's mainly through the chapter directors meeting, so I knew who she was. I'm not sure if she knew who I was as much, but that's okay. But to hear Debbie, she as a field investigator, she's so inspirational. I've heard her talk about she has like a MUFON field investigation CMS war room in her place where she has like maps and things where she's plotting out different shapes and sightings and times, and not just for her state, but also like for the neighboring states. And she's looking for patterns and stuff. And she's just really thorough, does a fantastic job. And of course, on the MUFON dive team, I think that's just incredible because I was talking to someone about MUFON recently, and they were like, "Oh, do you guys actually investigate the cases?" I'm like, "Yeah, yes, we investigate the cases." And I said, "And we've got a dive team," which people really don't. They think UFOs. They're always thinking in the air or in space. They're not thinking underwater. So um, I think the dive team is very cool. And then Debbie did a presentation on the dive team for the MUFON Symposium here in Dallas, like I said. And I was sitting there watching that. I was going, wow, this would be so good. I was like, I would love to have something like this at the Minnesota MUFON meeting. I thought, well, why don't you ask her? So I did, and she said yes. So I'm so excited to have Debbie here. I'm sure you're going to really enjoy it. She's got a great insight. She's very knowledgeable. And I'm looking forward to this. If you're looking forward to this presentation anywhere near as much as I am, you're going to have a great time. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie Ziegelmeyer. Take it away, Debbie. Give Debbie a big round of applause in the chat and whatever on the reaction. Yep, yeah, cool, cool, cool.
Wow, I don't think I could live up to all that, what you just said. But if you could, well, I don't know if you can see a little picture of me or not, but one on the screen, this is our MUFON library slash my MUFON office and my actual work office too. It's all kind of combined. Okay, well, what got me interested in water sightings? I think I was well ahead of my time. I became a field investigator, like you just said. I joined MUFON in 2000. I'd been going to meetings since the late 1990s. Joined in 2000, right at the beginning of 2001. I not only became a field investigator, but I also became a scuba diver. And so just looking underwater and thinking, wow, there's so much going on under here. People don't even realize how much is going on underwater. And you can't really see from the surface. You can't look at the surface and know what's going on under there. That's when I started getting interested in water sightings. So I was well before my time. And then now that's what everybody is talking about, water sightings. I thought, well, yeah, were y'all 25 years ago when I started getting interested. But anyway, as we've seen, there are sightings that most of the video that's being released are being released by Navy pilots, or they're being taken by Navy pilots, and they're, definitely over the water. But what I started thinking was, okay, so we've seen these craft hovering over the water. And let's see if I go, oh, okay, come on, next slide here. There we go. Okay. I started thinking, okay, well, I got all my research together. This is a map that's in Pine Bush, New York at the Paranormal Museum. I did this 3-4 years ago. All those dots in there, there's over 300 dots. These are all areas where I had the longitude and latitude and the location. Some of these dots could probably be 10 high, especially in the Caribbean. But most people don't realize how much is going on in our oceans and our seas. I left to the land alone and just focused the map on oceans and seas. the water is, there's just such a vast amount of water on the earth that people, unless you're on a cruise ship or you're on a Navy ship or you're on a merchant ship of some type, you're not even going to be able to see any of these sightings that are occurring. And I mean, it's just a massive amount. It's just incredible how many I found. I even have Columbus. In 1492. Columbus had a sighting, and his dot is on there because I was able to triangulate where pretty much from the description that I got in research, I know exactly where he was when he had the sighting. So some of the key factors to consider are these visitors? We've always considered these alien beings that are coming from wherever as being visitors, but they're not. I really believe they're, some of them are visitors, but resident. I mean, how long have they been here? Well, according to Webster's dictionary, living in a place for some length of time is residing. Colonization occurs whenever any one or more species populate an area. 70% of our Earth is covered by water. And according to NOAA, we've explored less than 5% of it. Most people don't realize that 1 in 5 of our UFO sightings are water related. Now, in an area where you have, a thousand lakes or where you have a lot of water, we have 3 major rivers in Missouri. Of course, the percentages could be much higher. Where you have maybe in Arizona, the percentage will be much lower. But on the average, 1 in 5 UFO sightings are water related. These are all pictures that I found. Some of these I got off of the Black Vault, John Greenwald's website. And of course, you can see the 4 here on the right are the videos, pictures, the still shots of the videos that were released by Navy pilots. You can see the ones at the bottom are the ones from, looks like submarine periscopes. So let's start with what has the government told us? Well, we're getting bits and pieces of information, but in December of 2017, Fox News reported that the Pentagon had secretly set up a program to investigate UFOs at the request of former Senator Harry Reid. He was starting to get concerned about whether or not the public should know and if these were some kind of a threat. In June of 2019, the Navy issued a new classification guideline on how to report UAPs. November 23rd of 2021, the U.S. Defense Department formally created a new department to track and organize UAP military sightings. In 2000, on January 11th of 2022, just a couple months later, the Pentagon opened an office in DC to investigate and study UAPs and report the findings to Congress, which by now are starting to make demands. In July of the same year, it was announced through Congress that they were going to start to focus on water sightings. Gee, wonder why. July 26th of 2023, the House Oversight Committee held a hearing, which was, I don't know if you watched the hearings, both of them, the one in 2023 and 2024, but I was amazed at some of what was brought up at these hearings, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But the first hearing was in on July 26th of 2023, and then we just recently, November 13th of 2024, had a follow-up to it. Most of what I heard were a lot of disappointed Congress people as to the lack of progress from the one in 2023, the last lack of progress of releasing what was going on. One of the most famous sightings, and then actually probably one of the ones that brought a lot of this to the attention of Congress, was the sighting by Commander David Fravor, who was flying an F-18 Super Hornet off of the Nimitz. The Nimitz and the USS Princeton had been conducting maneuvers for a couple weeks, and they were about 100 miles southeast of San Diego, practicing for deployment in the Persian Gulf. When you can see there, that's the Tic Tac and a picture of the commander. And he said that they showed briefly this Tic Tac coming, hovering over the water, coming in and out. But if you hear the entire video, they said that there was a fleet of them overhead, at least a dozen overhead. This one, the commander, happened to follow toward, basically down toward the water. It was the lowest one. He went up toward it, and then it shot down toward the water, and he followed it down, and that's where the video came from. So you think, okay, well, a tic tac. I mean, how long have we seen these? I found this in my copy of the Bible, in Zechariah 5:1-2. Then I turned and lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a flying roll. And he said unto me, What seest thou? And I answered, I seeth a flying roll, the length thereof of 20 cubits, and the beneath thereof of 10 cubits. And this is about 15 by, I think, 15 feet around and about 30 feet long. I also found another report of one of these Tic Tacs. This was a report from a former gunner's mate, John Bowman, who served between 2008 and 2013. He was stationed on the USS Carl Vinson in 2010. His report was, I was staring into the water from above when a large, flat, white tic-tac object, approximately 20 feet in length, suddenly appeared in my view below me, moving right and darted into the depths as fast as it appeared. I couldn't really comprehend what I saw. It was definitely a solid object, but when it descended, its forward end rapidly collapsed in on itself and disappeared. This was a report that I found. It was an article in England. This former British police officer, Gary Heseltine, claimed that UFOs spotted by the military came from undersea bases built and operated by aliens. So, you know, mostly we focus on reports in the United States, but these are all over the world. He said UFOs are often seen coming in and out of the water, so suspect that in our deepest oceans and trenches, we may well have alien bases. He spent 6 years working with the Royal Air Force Police and more than two decades with the British Transport Police, was told by The Sun. A quote, it sounds crazy, but if you think about it, we only know 5% of the oceans. We know more about the surface of the moon or Mars than our own oceans. So that would seem to me why UFOs are seen regularly coming in and out of the water. I think I just said that. This was one of the most recent released, was January of 2024, the jellyfish. I thought this was interesting. There were some people that tried to debunk it, but I watched a lot of interviews by Jeremy Corbell on this, and I really believe this is something that's an unknown. This was flying in over a base in Iraq. They don't want to, of course, tell where the base exactly is or the exact time or the date, but it was moving in one direction. It was filmed over the Persian Gulf at night. It was over a sensitive military installation, and eventually it submerged into Lake Hibernia, which I'm not really sure where that's located. I tried to find it, and I think they said that was a kind of a cover-up name. But what's interesting was that Jeremy Corbell said that he was only able to release parts of it. These are still pictures, but part of the video. And they told him they would give him the video, whoever his source is, which this man's got a phenomenal source, that they followed this on. It went underwater and stayed there for 17 minutes. And then when it came out and shot up into the sky, out of the water into the sky, it was done in such a rapid manner that it wasn't even just a flash, couldn't even be caught on camera. It displayed positive lift without typical aerodynamic means for lift and thrust. Signatures normally associated with propulsion maneuvers were absent. So let's go back a little bit. This is the 1960s. Lieutenant Commander Olev Sokolov publicly spoke of unidentified fast-moving submarine encounters. They were picked up in Russia, off of the Russian waters in the Black Sea by sonar, traveling faster than anything known. So they decided that after enough of these were being reported, they thought, well, let's bring some technicians on board one of these submarines and see what they can figure out. Well, they were watching these targets, and they moved faster than any known vessel. They performed unmatchable maneuvers. They escaped with ease, and the technician said, I don't know what these are. I have no idea. So they decided they really needed to have a committee and do further research on these. Also reported by British naval officer Ivan Sanderson, unidentified submarines in 1963. They were conducting military maneuvers off of Puerto Rico, training for detection and tracking of submarines. And there were 5 surface ships that were involved, including a command ship, the USS Wasp. several submarines and aircraft. And then one of the sonar operators on a destroyer reported that a submarine was breaking formation in an attempt to pursue a high-speed underwater object moving greater than 150 knots, which is 173 miles an hour underwater. And this was four times, let's see, it was four times the possible speed in 1963 and pretty darn fast in 2024. This was tracked for 4 days. It was seen at a depth of at least 27,000 feet and reported to the Command Atlantic Fleet in Norfolk, Virginia. Now you're not going to report something to your commander unless you're pretty sure that this is something that's an unknown. This was July 30th, 1967, about 120 miles off Brazil, of the Brazilian coast of Cape Santa Marte Grande. Captain Julian Ardanza was alerted to something strange in the water. He witnessed a shining object in the sea 50 feet off the starboard side, cigar-shaped, 110 feet long. He said it emitted a powerful blue and white glow, had no sound, no wake, no periscope, no railings, conning tower. It was just smooth. Another tic-tac. It paced the ship for 15 minutes at 25 knots, then rapidly dove underwater and vanished. Now, they were carrying some new type of experimental explosives, and they thought, well, that might have been why whatever that was tracking them. I was lucky enough to be able to go to Shag Harbor, and this is Chris Stiles, who wrote this fantastic book, Impact to Contact. Chris has been investigating what happened in Shag Harbor all the way since, but back since he was a child. But this happened October 4th of 1967. The area there behind me, it was great. When we took the tour, the Coast Guard showed up and started doing figure eights in the water right where this craft went into the water. And you can see they've got a big sign there. So this is a pretty big deal in Canada. But what happened was there were 11 people that saw this lit object. It descended into the water. Laurie Whitkins and four of his friends thought it was an airplane. So this thing went into the water about 820 feet offshore. They reported it to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who sent out a Coast Guard cutter 101. But before the cutter got there, everybody thought this was a plane that had crashed. And so before the cutter got there, all the local people were coming, as many that were in the area with their boats, thinking this was a plane that had gone into the water and they were going to be able to try and rescue somebody. Well, when they got there, there were lights on the water, but by the time they got there, the lights had disappeared deep into the water. They didn't see any plane. They didn't see any wreckage. But what they did find was this yellow foam that was floating on top of the water. And it's a shame. I don't think anybody collected any of the foam. But what had happened, this craft had gone 25 miles down, or 25 miles down the coast to Government Point, where there happened to be a U.S. submarine detection base, which Chris took us there too on our tour. The base is now closed and we got to walk all over it, but we could see that this is the area where this craft ended up. So it was underwater there, right off of one of our submarine bases, and this submarine base was also shared by the Canadian Navy. So the purpose of this base with between the U.S. and the Canadians was to detect Russian submarines that were coming into the waters. Well, the UFO was just, they decided they were just going to keep an eye on it. So they have all these ships over the top of it. And Chris told me that he found out years later that one of the ships was over the top, his dad was serving on. And all the years that Chris had investigated this, his dad had never mentioned that he was in one of the ships over the top of this. He found that after his dad had passed away. This was monitored. They monitored these two UFOs for a week. Chris said that there were actually some U.S. divers that he's interviewed that were underwater, and they saw aliens that were actually working on the ship because another ship showed up. And so now the second ship is trying to help repair the first ship. While they were watching this, here comes a Russian submarine into the waters. And as soon as the Russian submarine gets close, both of these two UFOs take off. They go underwater until they get to the Gulf of Maine and shoot off into the sky and out of our atmosphere. And I'd still like to go and dive this as a scuba diver. Chris knows the exact spot, which you can see it's behind us, but he said it's only about 53 feet deep. A lot was going on near southern Argentina. There were so many sightings from the 1960s that and into the 1970s that by 1973, the Argentine Society for the Investigation of Unusual Phenomenon announced that there was enough evidence that machines from another world had established undersea bases in the Gulf of San Jorge and San Partias in the coast waters off of southern Argentina that they were going to officially say that they believe there's an undersea alien base in that area, officially. So I started looking, I thought, okay, so we know there's a lot of people that think that there's bases, but what about sounds? Between all through the 1960s and 1970s in the Arctic waters, Soviet submarines and icebreakers were hearing this sound, and it sounded like frogs croaking. They called it Vakuri. That's basically a translation from Russia. It's kind of slang for to croak, which means like a frog. And this croaking sound, as the submarines would come into this one area, they could hear this sound. They would try and go down deeper and get closer to it, and the sound would go deeper. And as they come up, the sound would come up, and they'd move into another area, and the sound would follow them. And it played cat and mouse. This went on for, gosh, sounds like 20 years, all through the 60s and most of the 70s. When they leave the area, the sound stayed in that area. So it seems like there was someone that was trying to communicate, but had established their area and stayed pretty much in that area, resident. There were also in 1973 off of Venezuela, they believe there's an undersea base there. Thousands of witnesses reported seeing unknown craft entering and emerging from the Caribbean Sea off the north coast. And on March 22nd, several people saw two flying objects approach at a high rate of speed. They hovered at 200 meters. Then they were witnessed by 3,000 people, observed by police for 5 to 10 minutes. The craft separated and departed off into different directions. I had somebody say, well, has anybody seen anything off of Wales? We've heard about Puffin Island. I found this report early 1974. There were unknown lights that were seen leaving and entering the sea. Ufologist Phil Hoyle believes that there may be an underwater alien base here, that solid objects are seen leaving the sea. Numerous witnesses describe the same type of craft and lights, same descriptions. And some of the witnesses said they'd been abducted by humanoid-looking aliens and were told by the aliens that they had come from an underwater base. Catalina Island, I've been there several times. Beautiful place, gorgeous, beautiful water and coral. But Catalina Island on June 14th of 1992, there were more than 200 craft that were observed by witnesses. Now I checked back again and I thought, okay, was this 200 different reports? And I checked back my sources again. It took all day long. More than 200 craft were observed. They'd hover before accelerating. They were just taking off out of the water. They'd hover a little bit, and off they would go off into the atmosphere. They were witnessed by many people also in Malibu, which is 48 miles northeast. This was all reported to the Coast Guard at the time, and they refused to acknowledge that anything was going on. So you've got this much happening in that area, seen on Catalina Island, seen on the coast, and the Coast Guard said, yeah, there's nothing going on, nothing to see here. Mark D'Antonio, he's a great guy. I'm not sure if any of you have met him before. He's on a couple different TV shows where he's pretty much the expert that analyzes video and pictures for I believe he mostly is doing this. I believe it's on the Travel Channel. He's been with MUFON since he was also a little boy, 1971. he was telling me that, and he's told the story several times before, that in 1994, while he was at sea on a nuclear sub, he was working on a classified government project. And Mark said, well, the night before we left, I had a little bit of greasy food, got on the submarine the next morning, thought I'd be fine. And apparently when you get seasick, which Mark was, you go to sonar. For whatever reason, that's just the best place to be if you're seasick on a submarine. While he's in sonar, talking to the sonar operator, he saw this thing just whiz by the sonar screen. And he's, what was that? Well, the sonar operator said, hollered over to the XO and he said, we've got another one of these fast movers. What do you want me to do? And the XO said, you know what to do. He said, log it and stow it. So they don't really talk about it. Mark said, well, I'm a UFO investigator. I can investigate this for you if you want. And the XO said, Mark, do you enjoy being on our boat? And he said, yes, sir, I do. And he said, you want to stay? Mark didn't bring it up again. But I have somebody here locally that goes to our local MUFON meetings, and he is also retired from working on a Navy nuclear sub. He said that they several times saw these things moving across sonar, and they even had a few encounters in the Bermuda Triangle. They just don't talk about it. I ended up being a speaker on March 21st of 2019 on the MUFON cruise, and a lot of you probably don't know this, but MUFON does hold a cruise. I think they're starting back up again this year. I know that they had stopped it because of COVID. This was our guide. One of our stops was Cozumel, and Felipe was taking us around to the various areas. We were in this bus and talking, about the ocean, about things that happened, and about the culture of the place. And somebody said, have you ever seen a UFO? And I thought, well, that was going to be my next question. And he said, well, actually, yes. So he told us about how he had 20 years prior, he had seen this large silver metallic ball about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle car. And it had come out of the water behind this little island. And I said, where is this? And he goes, well, actually, that little island right there. We were standing there and he's telling us this story. He goes, right there, that little island. And so I took that picture. And he said, you can take my picture too. I want to be famous. The man was fantastic. Just such a oh my gosh, um, full of information. He was telling us about how the local fishermen, the professional fishermen, just basically any of the local fishermen there, but mostly the ones that do it for a living, how they see these lights underwater frequently, how they see things coming in and out of the water there in Cozumel frequently. Well, this particular time, he said this ball, the silver metallic ball, just as he was leaving, came out of the water and started following him. So he's driving home, and he's watching this thing over to his right, or his left as he's leaving. And the silver metallic ball is following his car, and he loses it in the mango trees, and then he sees it again, and finally he makes a right-hand turn and goes off to his house. When he gets to his house, his cousin was behind him, who also worked as a guide, and he said, Felipe, did you see that silver thing following you that came out of the water? And he said, yes, I did. But I asked him if he'd seen anything else. He said a lot of his family members had seen strange things coming in and out of the water and things glowing underwater in Cozumel. Well, what about giant swimmers? This picture here it's how would I put that? There isn't any, but there's nobody that will verify the picture exactly. I did hunt it down and found out that this was taken by a European research vessel, a research submarine. And they said that if you wanted to let's see, if you wanted to publish it, I'm sorry, I couldn't get it out. If you wanted to publish this in anything, you had to have direct permission from them. Well, I haven't published it anywhere, but they did admit to taking it, and they said this thing had come across the screen. I remember when this came across the news that this submarine had seen this creature that swam across. Now, there's several people. I liked this picture in particular because the next descriptions from other people who have seen creatures underwater fits this description. Well, this one right here, they're two scuba divers were on a yacht, and this one actually is only 7 foot tall, but there were two scuba divers that were on a yacht, and this yacht used to be owned by President Truman. Now, this report came out November 23rd of 1977, and this is from the MUFON archives, some of what you'll be able to read when you're able to access Project Aquarius. But this one particular time, this report was November 23rd of 77. This had happened 2 years prior to that. They just waited a couple of years to report it. But there was a very known scuba diver at the time in 1977. I'm not going to say who, but you could probably imagine who it is, and an anthropologist that were diving off the coast of Florida. They came across a 7 foot tall alien sitting on a rock. They said this thing had unusual ears, eyes, mouth, legs, and arms, no breathing apparatus of any type. It was just sitting on a rock underwater at depth. And keep in mind too that a recreational diver doesn't dive unless they've got special equipment or for some particular reason. These two were probably just recreational diving, but our limit's 130 feet. So it was that or less. They as they started toward it, it took off deeper into the water, but just as it was before it got out of sight, it turned around and looked at them and then disappeared into the depths. Lake Baikal in Russia is one of the deepest freshwater bodies in the world, 4,900 plus feet deep. This is an area where fishermen and just people in general that live around the lake have reported flying objects that come up from the water and go into the water. In this one particular case, this was 1982. There was a group of 7 military divers. These divers are the equivalent of being our Navy SEALs. So there's 7 Russian Navy SEAL type divers are going to go underwater and train. Now this is pretty intense training. They're at 165 feet. So of course they've got special air, they've got special equipment. They're down there training. It's pretty intense training. And if you think about it too, if you've ever been to a local lake, any lake, you go down 10, 15, 20 feet and it's dark. It starts to get dark. The deeper you are, the darker it is. The visibility is very limited. So can you imagine that 165 feet, these 7 guys have got pretty good sized flashlights, underwater flashlights to see where they're going and doing their training. Well, when they're not down there very long and they see 4 humanoid looking creatures 10 foot tall. And the creatures didn't have any type of dive gear, but they did have a helmet with some kind of an apparatus over their mouth. Well, they come across these creatures. It was one standing in front, 3 more to the back, the one in front seemingly to be in the leader. Well, naturally, these divers backed up and went to the surface and got out of there. But I just said they were at 165 feet. So you're 165 feet. You're not going to go right to the surface. You're going to come up little by little. I know when we did a 144-foot dive in actually Cozumel, we came up and I think we were 15 minutes at 75 feet, another 15 minutes at 50 feet. Then at the very end, I had another 12 minutes at 15 feet, decompression coming up in stages. So at 165 feet deep, these 7 divers came up little by little by little, knowing that there's these 10-foot tall creatures underneath them someplace. I mean, that just must have been unnerving. They get to the surface, they talk to their commanders about this, and it's decided they're going to go back and they're going to try and capture one of them. So a few days later, of course, they have the area GPSed. They go back down to this area, search around. Don't know how long they were under there, but eventually, yes, they did. They came across these 4 creatures again. 2 of the divers, they decided they're going to catch one and bring it to the surface. This was the plan. Now, there you got 2 of the divers have a large net. They're going to throw it over a creature that's 10 foot tall. And then I thought, well, what are they going to do with this thing? Were they going to throw the net over it? And then what are they going to bring it up in stages? Or are they going to use lift bags they're bags you fill with air from your secondary stage, where I guess it's your octopus, but it's a diver term, but you have 2 regulars, one in your mouth, and then you have an emergency second one that hangs from your right hand side. So you use that one to fill lift bags. They're going to take these lift bags, I guess, and just shoot this thing to the surface, or were they going to try and take it up slowly? I'm not sure what the plan was, but when they got close enough to this alien, the one in the front, and tried to put this net over the top of it, the creature put its arms straight out, and all 7 divers immediately went to the surface from 165 feet. When they got to the surface, 3 of them died almost immediately. The other 4 divers were taken to 2 decompression chambers. One was broke, so they took and stuffed all 4 of the remaining divers in one decompression chamber. One of them survived, the rest of them all perished. There was a hearing on this to determine whether or not they would try and go back, and after a hearing and trying to determine who was at fault for the lives of all these divers, they decided that they weren't going to do any more training in that lake or another neighboring lake, which they were afraid maybe might have the same type of creatures. This is an article I found that was published in a Russian magazine. Russian missions in the Baltic Sea frequently see unidentified, very large humanoid creatures. They're seen swimming deep in Soviet waters and have been for decades. Crews of Soviet submarines see these unusual creatures. They're described as human-like swimmers dressed in silver suits, 10 feet tall, swimming at ease at 1,300 feet. In the Black Sea, and this is a copy of the name of the magazine here. This is an article from Moscow, 1996. Shark hunter B. Borovikov was diving in the Anapa area and witnessed several huge creatures heading toward him. He said the creatures were about 8 meters away, swimming up from below, had fish tails, were milky white, humanoid faces. One stopped to stare at him, and he said it had large, giant, bulging eyes. I found a little article about someone who had found very large 10-foot tall bones. I found I did a bit more research and found this book. This is George Papashvili from Russia. And the title of the book is Anything Can Happen. The chapter was Where Sleep the Giants Still. What they would do was George and his friends, his wife and his friends, would sit around and talk about things that they did when they were children. They would talk about things they did in school, and they were just a bunch of friends getting together, and he and his wife decided they were going to write this book and put all the little stories together because they were so interesting. Well, this one in particular actually happened to George himself. He said he and 3 of his friends, they were 11 to 12 years old at the time, and one of the friends had a little bear cub named Mishka that they took with them. Well, they all decided that they were going to go swimming. They hiked to the Turgi River, where it turned into a small lake because of some floodwaters, and the lake was up. They dove off of this ledge, went into a deep hole, and when they came up, the ledge was off of a cliff. They came up underwater into a cave. They looked around the cave, and here they came up where they had breathable air. They found these large bones. They said they had a round human head the size of bushel baskets, bulges over the forehead, eye holes that a fist could go into, straight teeth, leg bones as tall as the boys, 5-finger hands, long legs, and they said alive they would probably have had a 6-foot stride. The boys didn't tell their moms because, for one thing, they weren't supposed to be hiking that far. From another, they weren't supposed to be jumping off of a ledge and then going underwater and then coming up into a cave. So for a lot of years, George didn't tell anybody, but he told this story with his friends. And he said the interesting part was one of the boys named Tito took one of the little pinky finger bones with him, and he doesn't know whatever happened to that. Puerto Rico. Years ago, I called when I first started talking about and researching water. I called Jorge Martin in Puerto Rico, and I was surprised because at the time he had AT&T service, and they said, "Oh no, it's U.S. territory; it doesn't cost anything." So we had a great conversation. Oh my gosh, for about an hour and a half. This is Jorge. He told me that was so much going on in Puerto Rico that he was a reporter and ended up an investigative journal, spending most of his time just uh, reporting and investigating this type of thing. But he said UFO activity in his area is not only coming out of the oceans surrounding Puerto Rico, but they're coming in and out of wormholes. He sent me these pictures from his website, so that's why it's in Spanish. And he believes he's discovered a very large undersea alien base. And this is the northwestern portion of Puerto Rico. This right here, the part coming up, I'm not sure if you could see my mouse, but right after he put that on his website, it was blurred out and it disappeared. Down here there's a wormhole. There's a craft that came out. He has a smaller picture and he blew it up here. This is a wormhole right here where there's a craft came out and went into the water. This is right. This part up here, the top left is ponds. And if you look online and you look at Puerto Rico and you go Google Earth, that's the southern portion, southernmost center of Puerto Rico by ponds. And that you can still see that, whatever that is, on Google Earth. They haven't blocked that out. I had heard for years that there were creatures that were seen in Puerto Rico. I had no idea how many. This was a small creature that was found in 1980. It was killed by a young man named Jose Zayas. He was in a cave in the National Guard camp area. And he said, as he was walking through this cave, just kind of exploring, he's this kid exploring a cave. And he said this creature grabbed him by the leg and scared him. So he picked up a stick and just started beating on it. Well, he ended up killing it. Well, he felt bad, so he took it to the police station and gave it to Officer Oswald Santiago. Santiago gave it to Guido Morales, who was the owner of the area funeral home. The Morales took it, put it in a glass jar full of formaldehyde, and he gave this one picture was taken by Rafael Berga. He said that the creature had white blondish hair on the sides of a large head, large transparent eyes with the pupils like a cat, long thin arms, hands reached its knees, four claw webbed fingers, feet like flippers. The creature never bled, but it was covered in a clear goo. It had male-looking genitals, but wasn't a baby or a baby monkey. And then he said they didn't have it very long, and men from NASA came and confiscated it. This area here, Laguna Cartagena in Puerto Rico, this is the southwestern part of Puerto Rico in the corner. This lake is very mysterious. In 1964, Schra and Quinn Ramirez saw two 7-foot tall white men with long blonde hair, silvery tight fitting suits. They were just walking in the area. August 31st of 1990, Miguel Figueroa and many others saw 5 creatures. They were skinny, grayish, pear-shaped heads, a slit mouth, long arms, 3 fingers, 3 toes. Were walking down the road. When he followed the creatures with his car, the creatures emitted a bright light like a welding torch from their eyes. Similar creatures were reported in the Caribbean National Forest. And in February of 91, police officer Luis Torres and his wife and 2 other officers and their wives saw 2 creatures walking down Route 191. They were 4 foot tall, green grayish skin suits with a hood they were wearing, on their arms to their knees, large elongated head, large eyes. Torres drew his gun for protection, and the creatures ran out of sight. On August 13th of 91, Schra Camacho saw the same creatures. They were taking her plants from the front of her house. And then later on in 1991, Ulysses Perez saw the same creatures near an irrigation corral. I've seen a lot of written reports in magazines and books about the Puerto Rican area and Lake Cartagena and the strange things. There's also craft that they've seen coming in and out of this lake. But I also found out too, because I had considered going to Puerto Rico and diving it, that the water is very contaminated. Chupacabra, we've all heard of chupacabra, but there are a lot, Brazil and Puerto Rico. there are a lot of reports, and both of those places are chupacabra. The first sighting was in 1995. They're described as having 3 or 4 clawed fingers on their hands, 2 elongated red eyes, small nostril holes, fanged teeth, long tongue, coarse black hair, almost like a razorback pig or like a gorilla. Some of them say that they're being described as being chameleon, that they can change their color from brown to green gray, light brown, beige. They may also be able to fly. Most of them are said to feed on animals and mutilate the animals while they're doing it. Jorge Martin said that he knows that several of these have been captured by the government. And we have a government base there in Puerto Rico. This is one newspaper article that I found. So I thought, okay, so now we have possible underwater bases. We've got sounds that have been seen underwater. We've got things that are seen going by on sonar. We have creatures that are seen underwater. I thought 70% of the earth is covered by water. Are abductees being taken underwater? Well, that was a really tough one because I interviewed a lot of abductees. I did a lot of research on this. I even called Kathleen Martin, and I called George Medich. And what we have is people remember being abducted. They remember returning. But under regression therapy, a lot of them remember what happened to them while they were taken. Very few people remember the trip there and back. And that's probably why, if you're going to concentrate on erasing somebody's memory, that's the most important part. Because if you've got a secret base someplace, whether it's underground, whether it's in a mountain, whether it's underwater, you don't want people to know where it is. So you make sure that that's the one memory that you take away from people. But I found about a dozen. This was Orlando Jorge Ferrati, August of 1956. This is an 18-year-old who was night fishing on the beach near Buenos Aires. He was approached by a 7-foot-tall humanoid that had white skin, light-colored eyes, short hair, and wore a tight-fitting yellow hooded overall. He was mentally told not to be afraid. The alien was holding this box, and when he opened it up, it kind of lit the whole area up, and he saw this craft. Well, the ramp for the craft, the door opened up, a ramp came down, and they entered it. When he got inside, he saw this younger girl that he found out later her name was Elena from San Luis. He figured she was about 5 or 6 years younger than him. The aliens, they had a female alien that came to get Elena, and the male alien stayed with him. They took Elena, the female alien took Elena off, and both of them were made to change their clothes into these coveralls or these overalls that were the same thing that these aliens were wearing. They said that they had to take the clothes away from both of them because they were contaminated. And they were put into something that looked like a TV filled with green smoke. Now, if you can think back, this is 1956, so the TVs were kind of like this box console, like a nightstand cabinet with drawers. Instead of it being a drawer, that's your TV screen. So just imagine back what TVs looked like back then. So I guess they were decontaminated. Well, they were taken underwater. They came up off the coast of Uruguay, then they crossed the Atlantic to Africa, and then came up again, and they kept going underwater and coming up. And Orlando asked, he said, why do we keep going underwater and coming back up? And the alien said, well, they didn't want to seem like invaders. And so they tried to stay underwater for as long as they could, but they wanted to transverse to different places. They told the two that in 1950 they had built 2 underwater bases. The two young people were taken to a base that was in the Gulf of Mexico, and then which was a sub-aquatic dome-like, looked like an Eskimo igloo. They said it was about 5 or 6 blocks of buildings. And they said that they were told by aliens that this was a base that they used to recondition their ships. Linda Porter, she's a very a popular abductee that was also taken underwater. She's drawn drawings and she's very famous for the time in 1961. if you were in ufology at that time, you pretty probably knew about Linda Porter. But her story was that at age of 15, she was taken to an underwater base at the bottom of the ocean off the coast of California near Santa Barbara. She said that where she was taken was the height of two three-story buildings. She was told that they were camouflaged by an electronic net. Well, that makes sense because we know that there's a lot that goes on in and around Catalina Island. And if you've got a base there that was built in 1961, because you remember in 1992 is when all those things were coming in and out of the water, all those unidentified craft. Not back in 1961, she was told there's this camouflaged net, an electronic net, that it hides their base from submarines, from people, from divers, from fish, from whoever. And that's how they keep secure. She said there was a praying mantis, and she drew this picture here, a large praying mantis that was leading her into this lit room, and this creature didn't talk to her at first. It talked to her mentally, but at first it just left her alone because it knew that she would be very afraid of it. She ended up having numerous encounters throughout her teens and her 20s. And on February 28th of 1991, she reached out to Linda Moulton Howe. She sent her a package that had an audio cassette of herself with some of her sightings. And she also sent a letter and some drawings. Linda set it up to where she could have regression therapy. And after numerous aggression therapy sessions, she started remembering that some of the places that she was taken, some of the things that she experienced. She remembered motion sickness during a transportation in an interdimensional tunnel. She also remembered that, you remember the first time she was taken was at 15. Well, she went back at 17 years old, and apparently they had cloned her body. They had cloned her, and her new body was in a transparent tube. She had severe heart disease, and so they gave her a healthier body. They told her that this was called resurrection technology. So I guess they took her at 15, and maybe took a couple years. I'm not sure if that's when they initially did this or not, but she said at 17, she got a new reconditioned body. Betty Andreessen remembered being abducted January 25th of 1967. She was in her kitchen, along with her 7 children, her mom and her dad. Her children were between the ages of 3 and 11. And at first they saw this reddish light, and it came in with a beam through the kitchen window. Her dad ran to the window to try and see what this was, where this light source was coming from. Betty ran over and comforted her children. Well, her father ended up seeing these creatures. He saw 5 odd-looking creatures that were coming toward the house. They walked right through a wooden door. Then Betty looked over, and her entire family was put in some type of suspended animation. She was taken, and just her, and put aboard a 20-foot in diameter saucer-shaped craft. She underwent a physical examination, returned home 4 hours later, and the whole family was still in suspended animation. And another creature, one of the creatures, stayed there. And she said, "Well, why did you stay with my family?" And she says, "Well, they wanted to make sure that no one was injured." 8 years later, after this incident, she answered an ad from J. Allen Hynek about people who had been abducted and if they wished to have some type of regression therapy. Hynek published a paper that was 528 pages long of the accounts of things that had happened to Betty. This is just a couple of her drawings here. She said she remembers one occasion there was a gray leader that was 5 foot tall, and others that were 4 foot tall, pear-shaped head, wide eyes, small ears and nose, slit for a mouth. They wore blue coveralls with wide belt and boots. See that? And I never thought the aliens wore clothes. This is 3 times now that there's been some type of a coverall, and it has a hood. These are in blue. The other ones I mentioned before were 2 of them were in yellow. They had a logo of a bird on the sleeve, hands with 3 fingers. Creatures did not walk, they floated. She remembers in the fall of 1945, she saw a circular object land, felt paralyzed, found herself in a white room with 3 small beings. They had light globes that they took and they placed around her, and they said she experienced these flashing lights and a spinning motion. And inside, she was put inside a craft. The craft plunged into a body of water, then rose up above it, and she realized that she was now inside a clear icy cave. On another occasion, she remembers seeing a glass dome above her, and this flying object that she was in went into the water off of the U.S. coast. She wasn't sure where. A quote from her book was, "It's going so fast. Oh, it feels like I'm staying still. I'm tilted a little. Oh, there's water coming up. Ooh." And so she remembers water as well. Water was rolling around, around and around. Uh, it took her to she was taken to a large aquatic base, and she said the base was a museum, that there were examples of humans in glass containers from different eras in history. But these are just some of the pictures here, like I said, the drawings that she made of some of her encounters and some of her memories. This one I thought is probably the most interesting. This is Captain William Schaffner. He was sent I guess, to investigate and to, I guess, interact with a UFO. He was flying over, let's see, he was off the east coast of Yorkshire, off the British coast, off Flamborough Head, and he was sent up. There was an unidentified object that was picked up on radar. He was sent up to, I guess, investigate it, and ended up in a dogfight with this thing. Well, he crashed into the North Sea. He disappeared from radar and crashed into the North Sea. They spent 3 months looking for him. They couldn't find his plane at all. And sure enough, it took them 3 months, but they finally did find his plane. What was really odd was that it was sitting on the seabed, completely intact, not damaged. Now he's in this dogfight with a UFO. And 3 months, he disappears from radar. 3 months later, they find his plane fully intact, not damaged. So it goes down into the water and doesn't even get damaged. Down in the water, sitting on the bed of the ocean, the floor bed, the canopy still fully intact and shut. There was no sign at all of Captain Schaffner's body. So how did he escape? There's his plane. The canopy is still intact, still closed, no body, no pilot. I just thought that's very intriguing. I have no idea what happened to him at all, and neither do they, and he was never found, never heard from again. That was so strange that Russell Kellett, uh, from off the east coast of UK, he's been investigating this same area where this happened for over 20 years. He thinks that there's an underwater base there off the coast of Yorkshire. Russell, 60 years old, said, "I've been visiting the site for the last 20 years. I've captured footage of things coming out of the water," and he said he'd also capture things going into the water. He decided that he was going to come forward and tell all this now because the U.S. was starting to talk about this, and he thought this is the perfect time. People aren't going to think he's crazy. So in August of 2023, he finally came forward and said, "Okay, look, this is what I've got. There's a base there." This is a former pilot, commercial airline pilot, that had an encounter off of Puerto Rico in 1972. The first of all, started in 1971. David Del Mundo was a commercial pilot for a Puerto Rican airline. As he was flying, he saw many greenish blue lens-shaped luminous objects close to his flight. And where he reported this when he got back, he reported it to air traffic control. He reported it to his airline. Unfortunately, he also reported it to the local newspaper and was fired. So nothing else was said. He couldn't get another job as a pilot. But a year later, in 1972, he said he was just standing in his house, and all of a sudden he turned around and there was this human-like creature standing next to him. He doesn't even know how it arrived. The creature was 5'3", thin lips, nub nose, green wide wrapped around oval eyes. It had a one-piece gray uniform with a U emblem, was wearing a turban headdress with 10 to 12 pointed stars on the front of it. David DeMundo was taken to a 30-foot in diameter craft. He said the interior was lit in green with 4 chairs and a control panel. They told him they had come from a place near Orion. They discussed the laws of parallels in matter, and he was given new knowledge. But he said the craft submerged 35 miles southwest of where he was and then descended down to 9,000 feet. He said then the underwater they came across this mountain. Matter was displaced and they entered a dry cave. And he said there were 25 other craft inside this cave. He said he was fed a strange meal and told that 83 other contactees were there, although he didn't see them. He was just told that. He was also told that there were 6 additional underwater camps that were being built through 1996. So this is 1972. By 1996, there were going to be a total of 6 camps. They said that the aliens change out every 6 months. And he asked why the Puerto Rico area, and they said, well, Puerto Rico is highly magnetic. It helps trap energy that's needed to leave the atmosphere. Pascagoula River I got this. It's Mississippi. I know where it is. It's in Mississippi. The ship. This is 2 shipyard workers. Charles Hickman, 42, and Calvin Parker, 18. So they left work. The 2 of them left work. This was highly publicized. They left work, went fishing. They're off of a dock, and as they're fishing, this blue light comes up from behind them. They didn't see it at first, but then they saw the glow. They turned around and it was a ball-shaped object that descended behind them. And they said it was just barely above the ground, 30 foot long, 8 to 10 foot high, football shape, domed on top. The door opened and these 3 aliens glided out. One got on either, the 2 men, they lifted the 2 men up and took them into the craft. And there was one on either side of them on the outside, one in the middle. So they grabbed them all by hands and these 3 aliens led these 2 gentlemen up into this craft. Right off, Calvin Parker fainted. Charles Hickman remembers almost everything. But the beings were described as humanoid with no neck, pointed 2-inch long nose, a slit for a mouth, long arms, hands that resembled mittens with thumbs, legs that remained together, elephant feet, grayish wrinkled body, eyes. And they couldn't see their eyes really because they were blocked by the skin that kind of covered down over them. The beings, as they took them up, into, well, I already mentioned that Parker had fainted. They were both basically paralyzed and given examinations. Well, they went to the police department and described what had happened. There's been a couple different TV specials. Calvin Parker, I believe, just died not too long ago. And there's been several TV specials on this, and including this new book that I just purchased. Philip Mantle and Irina McCammon Scott. So this book kind of continues with the story. Now, I had heard that there was somebody across the river there in Mississippi. There was someone else across the river that had seen this happen. Well, it turned out that there was a couple. Maria Blair said that she and her husband were on the other side of the river and they were getting ready to load their fishing boat. So as she's putting clothes in, she saw this blue lights in the sky. It's kind of like searching around. And then she heard a splash, and this humanoid creature came up from underwater, kind of looked at her, and she said it was grayish. And first she thought it was a scuba diver, but it wasn't wearing any kind of a diver suit. Then she said it just kind of like sunk back underwater, and that was it. Well, her husband, Jerry, he said, that's not really what happened. He said there were 2 creatures. There was the one that encountered her, and then there was another 6-foot-tall gray at the end of the pier that grabbed him. It floated him into the spaceship. He said he watched as Maria was floated by the 5-foot-tall creature to the spaceship. Their examinations were done on both of them. Then they were taken back to their boat. They watched the creatures float away to the other side of the Pascagoula River toward the spacecraft, and then the craft took off out of sight. And they had seen the lights going on when the other 2 gentlemen were being abducted. So they were watching part of that as well. And if that isn't enough, about a month later on November 8th, Raymond Ryan, age 42, was also fishing on the Pascagoula River. He said that as he was on the river, he looked and there was this ball of light and it was just falling along in his boat. So he started smacking at it with his boat oar. Then he decided he was going to go back to the shore and he was going to get his twin brother, Ramey. Well, he got him. They went back and they both start smacking to this thing with their oar, with a boat oar, and there's this light just following their boat around. So they reported it to the Coast Guard, and at 9:40 p.m., the Coast Guard dispatched a 16-foot boat. They located the object in 4 to 6 foot of water, and they said it was moving about 4 to 6 knots. Well, this is the Coast Guard's description. Amber beam, 4 to 6 inches in diameter, attached to bright metal object. Tried to retrieve. It would go out, move away, then reappear. Traveled several different courses within an hour, referred to by Coast Guard as unidentified submerged illuminating object. This was reported to Washington, D.C., and there's an article there about this. Fred Valenci on Saturday, October 21st of 1978, disappeared. He was a 20-year-old pilot from Southeast Australia. He was in a small Cessna plane over the Bass Strait, headed to King Island. He radioed Melbourne Air Traffic Control about an unknown craft about 1,000 feet above him. His plane was, he said, running rough. This whole thing, his plane was shaking and running rough. He heard, like a banging sound. He was in a panic. His controls weren't working. He told him there's a long shaped object. He said, coming for me right now. It's hovering on top of me. It's not an airplane. And then his plane just vanished. The last sound that air traffic control heard was this screeching of metal on metal. They searched and searched for him. No sign of him was ever found. They never even found his plane. They never found anything. But in that area, they believe that there's an alien base in the Bass Strait. Oh. Okay, here, wait a minute. Went way too far ahead. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, there we go. Filberto Cardenas. On January 3rd of 1979, he was in Gila, Florida with his family. He had his wife Myrta and his daughter Isabel and his friend Fernando Marty. They were all traveling in his car, and all of a sudden his car just quit for no reason at all. So he and his friend Marty got out, and they're working on a car. And there's a picture there from the newspaper. They're doing a reenactment about how they were working on the car, and all of a sudden the car just started to shake. Myrta grabbed Isabel. They were in the back seat of the car, and she got on top of her, down onto the floor, the floorboard there, in the back seat, and covered her up. And then both men became paralyzed. Fernando watched Filberto be just taken off into the sky. This craft came, he was just beamed up and gone. Filberto awoke seated aboard a UFO. He said he was taken to an underwater alien base near Miami. He saw 3 strange figures. Then he was taken to a smaller ship where he saw a beach approaching. He said the UFO then plunged into the Pacific Ocean. Now, he was in the Atlantic Ocean off of Gila, Florida. Now he's over in the Pacific Ocean. He said he could see a tunnel where the ship entered. He emerged in a place that was completely dry, welcomed by a human-looking figure that said that he had been living there in the base underwater and working with these alien beings for years. He was then taken to a quick trip to an undersea alien city and then returned to a pasture. So in the meantime, the family, they get the car started and they go back to town. They're telling the police he disappeared. Well, they ended up finding him about 10 miles from where he disappeared in a pasture. This is, let's see. Okay, let me go back here again. Whoops, can't see it. Okay, and you can see down here, he ended up in the hospital. They did an exam on him, the newspaper article there. Couldn't find anything wrong with him, but he disappeared for hours. Ed Waters and Gulf Breeze. We all know about Gulf Breeze and about the craft. This was a craft that was seen by Ed Walters, and a lot of people thought that maybe it was faked. And that's kind of a whole story behind that, how he built a replica in his garage just because he was so obsessed with trying to figure out what he had seen. But there's a couple of the pictures that he had turned in. These were analyzed by Dr. Bruce Maccabee. But Bud Hopkins, on the other hand, interviewed him. Ed Walters started having reoccurring dreams. He remembers rising high in the sky over the coastline, then a quick descent and passing beneath the water. He remembers gasping for air in fear of drowning, but then he realized he was in some kind of a container. He could see water and fish from this diamond-shaped window of the container, numerous bubbles that would pass by the window, followed by raising sand which covered the glass. So apparently he went underwater someplace and then they went under the sand into some type of a base. And this was a reoccurring dream that he had. Linda Napolitano and was actually her alias was Linda Cortell for the book. This is the book Witness by Bud Hopkins. Linda Cortell, 41, woke up in her apartment in Manhattan, New York, with on November 30th, 1989, at 3 o'clock in the morning, with her husband sleeping next to her. She was floated out the window from her 12-story floor window, apartment window that wasn't even opened, just right through the window, by 3 alien beings and into a craft. She entered this disc-shaped craft through an opening in the bottom and then made a sharp crash into the East River near Pier 17, came to a stop underwater. She said she remembers seeing trash floating by in the river and then going underwater. She could see all this through a window. She was taken to an examining room with several strange creatures and described them as gray alien beings. As she was on this table, they started doing things to her, and she said it wasn't very pleasant. She started screaming, and one of the aliens put its hand over her mouth until the procedure was over to try and hush her up. And then she was brought back to her bedroom where her husband was still asleep. Well, there were other witnesses to this. Richard and Dan were working as bodyguards to the United Nations Secretary Javier Perez de Solar. They were crossing the Brooklyn Bridge and their car just cut out. So Richard and Dan got out and they watched this whole thing take place with the woman hovering, her going into the East River near Pier 17. However, later they claimed they contacted Bud Hopkins and Linda Cortell, and they said, well, actually, we were 2 police officers and we were underneath the Brooklyn Bridge and we happened to see this happen. Then after they were interviewed by Bud Hopkins, again, their story kept changing. And in April of 1991, they kidnapped Linda Cortell, um, dragging her into their car right off the street and interrogating her for several hours. Bud Hopkins thought these men were probably CIA or FBI, and he interviewed one of them, and I believe it might have been Richard, several times. But it's all in the book. It's very intriguing as to what was happening here. You know, first they keep changing their story, but then it gets very detailed as to all the things that Bud Hopkins was threatened and she was threatened, and all of the start and all she was doing was sleeping and taken out her window and had witnesses, which, by the way, Janet Kimball came forward and claimed that her car was also stalled on the Brooklyn Bridge at the same time. This is another witness and described the same event. She said that she never said anything until she saw this coming out. She ended up, seeing a film of this and seeing some of it on the news and realized that this actually happened. She thought that this was some kind of a reenactment for a movie. These are pictures here that were drawn by Linda. Anna Jamerson had, this is her. Are we back?
We're back.
Oh, okay. Anna Jameson. Oh, okay. I don't know if you heard anything else saying about her. She basically had reoccurring dreams that she was taken underwater. This is her book. And then I think I had said before that all of these abductees that I bought their books. And so I would make sure I got the exact account from them. But she remembers being taken off an island, seeing a huge ocean liner coming at her bow first. She's of the ship first. She's underwater. And she was floating down a long tube with soft sides. Whoops. It's going too fast. She remembers in junior high being at the beach with her mom and a strange fog coming in. Everybody else left, but she and her mom decided to stay. And through this fog, 2 alien grays took her mom away, and then she was led by another alien gray away. She was looking through something that looked like water, but she wasn't sure if it was a projection or if it was just if it was an actual looking out a window. She had Are you okay? Can you hear me okay?
We can hear
Yeah,
you. Okay.
we can hear you
Okay.
fine.
Little bit of echo, but other than that,
If everybody would please make sure that they're muted, that would
Yeah, I'm
be
hearing some kind of
best.
an echo. She always had some kind of fish tank. She was told by these alien creatures to study the water, and she always did. She won a prize at a science fair for her collection of tropical fish. And at age 14, her dad taught her how to scuba dive. I found this Katerina Wilson. She was taken September 10th of 1989 from Pensacola, Florida. She said she was standing with four beings over the water behind her house. She remembers somehow being in a strange craft. Was given, now this was really odd. I've heard of giant owls. I've never heard of a 5 foot tall gray kitten, but she was given a kitten to hold. Then after she got onto this base, the kitten was taken away from her. She was implanted with a memory of abused seals and dolphins and told not to eat fish. These are some of the drawings that she did. Some of this is pretty bizarre, except the book was endorsed by Bud Hopkins, John Carpenter, Donald Ware, Vicki Lyons, and Wendell Stevens. She is one of the few people that was actually inside one of these Tic Tac craft, and there's a drawing of her. She's trying to kick out the window. She was taken aboard this thing with her friend Eric. I think from what they described, they were parking in the woods. Um, she said that she describes it basically as being 5 foot wide in the aisle, and the beginning at the front part is where the controls were, and the back part was some kind of a storage. She remembers also seeing Navy and foreign military people involved. So now we've seen about a dozen people that were taken underwater, and they remember being abducted and taken underwater. But how are they being undetected for so long? Well, we have deep water trenches, and I took this picture. The guy horizontal in the middle is my son-in-law, Roger. We're at 100 feet deep, and he's equalizing. But we have trenches underwater that average about 2.5 miles deep. The Mariana Trench in the way Southern Pacific is 7 miles deep. We can't handle pressure very well. Alien craft apparently can, and that's a perfect place to hide. This is what happens, the Titan, June 18th of 2023, when it went down and decompressurized. 6,000 pounds of pressure per square inch go inward. You don't blow up, it pressures in and just basically the pressure just compacts and you implode rather than explode. So we have trouble handling pressure, and that's why we can't find out, we can't see what's going on deep, deep, deep in our waters. We have limited access. Now, this is a cruise ship that I took. If you look over, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but all the way to the right-hand corner, there's a diver. That's me. This is a plane that was crashed in the 1970s outside of Cozumel, right off of the coast. There's a cruise ship, and you can look off that cruise ship and not see this plane underwater and not see us diving. You can see the bubbles. It's only 22 feet deep. So the water is very, very, very clear in the Caribbean, but even with that, you can't see from the top of that cruise ship or any part of that cruise ship what's underwater right there. That's how easy it is to hide something underwater. This is a picture that I took January 25th of 2006. I went diving all day long in St. Martin. We were headed to St. Thomas, and as I'm walking to meet the rest of the group, the thing was that everybody got to see St. Martin. I didn't. So I stayed. I took pictures as the ship was leaving. We got about 20 minutes from St. Martin headed to St. Thomas, and it's about 20 minutes after 6. There was nobody out there but crew. The crew was gathering up towels, fixing chairs, getting ready for the nightlife. Everybody was inside getting ready for dinner. This is back when they had formal dinner, so you had a 6:30 or an 8:30 dinner. Everybody was taking formal pictures. I'm outside taking pictures because I was already early on the ship because I got brought back at 4:30 from the scuba diving. And as I'm walking, I look over to the right on the right-hand side, and I saw these craft. They were about the size of cars. They glowed. I didn't see the one at the top that looks like it's covered by a cloud. But the first thing I did as an investigator was turn around to see what was glowing on the water from the ship. When I turned back around, we were leaving these behind. The interesting thing was that every picture that I took after that, the camera was reset to February 5th and then kept on recording the date after that, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. But my camera setting was set several days ahead from the reaction from this. I asked to speak to the captain of the ship. They wouldn't let me speak to the captain. Nobody knew anything. I asked if there was any kind of a remote control, anything they put off the side of the ship for tourists, which I was the only one out there on this big ship. This was Explorer of the Seas, which has about 3,500 people on it and about 1,900 crew. I'm the only one that saw, well, I'm sure the captain saw this, but as far as I know, I'm the only passenger. Went to Catalina Island, thought maybe I'm going to see something. This is a book, A Terror in the Sky, if you get a chance. The beginning of it, I love William Shatner, but it's a little bit hokey at the beginning. They talk about Shatner and about things in space, and eventually they do an investigation that comes out very, very interesting. They stage on Catalina Island and then back in Laguna Beach. And they catch some very interesting things that are in the sky. And they actually, at the very end, you'll see they catch a wormhole and a couple of the objects that they caught on video going into it. This was outside of our hotel and it was very bright. This is most likely, this is a meteor. But if you look, let's see if you can see your mouse, my mouse. Right up in there, you're going to watch something fall now all the way to the right. You see that? I mean, so just very briefly with my night vision camera, I was able to catch something that I thought, wow, that's interesting. Well, I'll play it again real quick. And then I'm looking toward the coast of California, looking toward Laguna Beach. That there's a little something fell. So now where are we at? Well, hearings. July 26th of 2023, we had the hearing. David Grush testified under oath before a House Oversight Committee, along with David Fravor and Ryan Graves, that were both involved in that Tic Tac incident in November of 2004. Grush answered questions from the representatives on otherworldly sightings and the need for more congressional authority over the Pentagon's UFO programs. I thought it was interesting that Grush said that he knows people that have been physically harmed in an effort to cover up extraterrestrial activity, and that the U.S. is in possession of alien technology, remains of non-human pilots whose UFOs have crashed, and he claimed we have in our possession 12 alien craft. Then we had the hearing just this past November 13th of 2024, titled The Unidentified Anonymous Phenomenon Exposing the Truth. Luis Elizondo, you can see the players right there. We had Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, Lou Elizondo, Michael Schellenberger, and also Michael Gold. Michael Gold was from NASA. He's the guy all the way on the right. Lou Elizondo, former military intelligence officer, made it clear we are not alone in the cosmos. There were also witnesses, and every one of them here on the panel reinforced the fact that many of the sightings of objects are in the water. So there we go again, water. The gentleman all the way on the right from NASA, Mr. Gold, he claimed mostly that NASA needed more funding, that they went back through some tapes, maybe they could find something, except that I went to the government book website and found these two books, NASA Attempts to Communicate with Extraterrestrials, 1971, Summer Facility Fellowship Program and Engineering System Design. That's Project Cyclops. That was set up to access what we would require hardware, manpower, time, funding, to mount a realistic effort aimed at detecting the existence of extraterrestrials, ultra solar system intelligent life. This study was by Stanford NASA Ames Research Center. NASA in 2014 put out this other book, Archaeology, Anthropology, and Interstellar Communication, a collection of essays that were all written by experts on how to communicate. So we haven't really, NASA's never really encountered anything. They never seen anything, but they're sure trying to communicate with them. I don't know how many of you, speaking of communicating, saw or heard about the drones. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the drones now. They're in New Jersey. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. They're in New Jersey. 4.1 miles north of my house is the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA, which delivers, this came off their website, world-class geospatial intelligence provides a decisive advantage to policymakers, military service members, intelligence professionals, and first responders. It's a unique combination of Department of Defense, combat support agency, and a principal member of the U.S. intelligence community, gives war fighters, the IC, and first responders a worldwide first-hand intelligence baseline for their own analytical and operational needs. One of my investigators used to work there, but he's retired. He said, we gather more secret information from satellites in that one facility in one day, the US does, than everybody else in the world combined. This is 4.1 miles north of my house. The top picture up there is this Chinese spy balloon. The one right below it was December 10th. I tried to take this with my cell phone. First of all, I saw this bright light right out my window, and I thought, what in the world? It was low, it was bright. I went outside, there was a loud noise. I took my iPhone 14, put it up there, caught just this little bit of video, then it's automatically shut off itself after about 5 seconds and said, not enough light. But you can probably, at the top part of the screen right in here, there it is. It's not very, I only got 5 seconds of it. I kind of blew it up here, and it looks, and these are bad pictures, but it looks exactly like what everybody is reporting in New Jersey of one of these drones. So people look at the sky, because if you think they're only in New Jersey, they're not. I've seen them in Missouri. We've got sightings of these drones in the Kansas City area, a lot of sightings in the Kansas City area, and they're starting to pop up in all of our UFO investigations, our reports now. Oh, okay, I think, was that the last? Oh, okay. So I think, so this, if you need any more information about anything water related, this is my book, Alien Colonization of Earth's Waterways. This is 20 years of information gathered up, and it's not updated yet. I mean, but it was published the end of 2021. So I mean, it's only a couple years old, 22, 20, yeah. Well, even I think it's only about 2 years old. I took all the information I gathered for 20 years and put it into one book. It was the first book I'd ever written. I've written a couple. I'm working on number 3 now, which is going to be more of the creatures that are underwater and more sightings that are reported by people that have been taken underwater. Anybody have any questions? I think I'm right at the end of my time.
I've actually got a couple of questions, but I know someone else does too, so I'd like to let the viewers go first. I know Roger Cavandi has some questions, so I'm going to ask Roger to unmute so he can chat with you a little bit.
I had to turn on lights. It got dark in here.
Yeah.
I was
Sure.
interested, excuse me, sorry. I was interested in the girl with the bad heart. How was she transferred to the clone, her mind?
Oh, they said that according to her book, it was some kind of a body resurrection, and I think she said they took her soul. I know that she went to sleep. They took her soul. They did a soul transfer, so and put her in the new body. I mean, that's kind of how she described it, that it was a soul transfer. So they transfer her essence, um her essence into the new body. It's kind of what it is. I think it was called they called it, I forgot what they said. It was a soul, a resurrection or something. I mean, just way beyond anything, but she said, yeah, it's in her book. And I think, wasn't that Linda Porter? I think it's in her book. And if you want to email me, I can tell you exactly which book, and then you can read all about it too.
Okay.
My email address is mufondiver@gmail.com, and then you can email me questions there too. And the book's back behind me someplace or over here.
How does she know she's not a copy?
You're right. She could be the copy. She just knows that she was told she had a heart problem. She said she saw this body in a tube and they told her that she had heart disease and that they were going to do, I believe it was called a body resurrection, and that her essence, her soul was transferred to the new body because the old body was, no, I guess not going to be able to function anymore because of heart disease.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. I've got two questions unless someone else got any. I'm not seeing anyone else jumping up. So the one thing is the past number of years I've heard like an uptick in reports and videos of mermaids, and we talked about the Lake Baikal and underwater entities and that. What are your do you have any thoughts on mermaids, and is it related to the underwater entities that you've investigated, or what are your thoughts on that?
I'm beginning to wonder about that too, because they talk about mermaids. They had said that one picture that I showed that someone had mentioned, well, it looks like a mermaid of some type. There, it's the same as you go back through history and there's elves. Well, you got elves back in history where they graze. You've got abominable snowman, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti. People perceive things in different ways. They give different labels. I'm wondering if all these elves back in history weren't some type of a small creature. So mermaids the same way. A lot of this from history, it just it's named something different. It's perceived differently. But there was one that washed up on shore not too long ago, and they covered that up. It was a couple, 3 years or so ago. Some kind of a being. Then they say, well, no, it was a fake. Well, they say everything's a fake. It's hard to believe anything anymore, but every little bit of information a person can get. But I saw that one picture, and then lo and behold, I'm getting all these descriptions, and it looks like that picture that they're saying, well, they really can't verify it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the other thing I had a question about too, you mentioned that one pilot was in a dogfight with a craft. So when I think dogfights, there's shots being fired back and forth. And I know we have the ability to shoot. Do you know, was the craft firing back? And if so, what was it firing? Solid or energy, or do you know anything about that? Or
They just said that that he was in some type of a dogfight, that he was sent up to encounter it, and I think he was sent up to shoot it down. And they said a dogfight ensued, and then he just left radar. They thought that the alien craft had shot him down, and they looked all over, never found the craft until 3 months later, and there it is on the bottom of the ocean with the cockpit still intact. And if you've seen a Top Gun, that when they eject, the whole cockpit, the whole lid of it's gone.
yeah,
So
yeah.
how was that plane not damaged at all, fully intact, sitting in the bottom of the ocean with the canopy still there and no pilot?
Yeah, because you rarely hear about the craft firing at us. So it's, but every once in a while I hear that, something that suggests to me. So do you think the craft was actually firing back too, or no? Do you have
I looked at the newspaper article and they just said that there was a dogfight that ensued, and they didn't
Yeah.
say whether or not we were firing or it was firing. They just know that they set it up there. The dogfight ensued, and the plane disappeared. They assumed it was shot down by a UFO.
Cool. Now is your time for questions. You got questions. Now's the time. Who's got a question? Oh, there's some stuff in the chat. Let's
Yeah,
see.
there's one in the chat says one of the pictures reminded me of a mermaid video I saw that seems legit. Do you know if there are any correlations with mermaids or know anything about them specifically?
Yeah, I think I answered that. And I just, like I said, I tend to believe that some of what was brought, in that you hear in the past, it's just that we label it differently. So I think in the past, yeah, people probably saw mermaids at one point. Who knows if one of these creatures wasn't caught by a fisherman back, centuries ago, when they said, oh, it's a mermaid. I would tend to believe that there are, if they're not, there's not a race of mermaids under there. I think there's a race of alien beings underwater that live there. And I've had a lot of people say that, how long you think they've been there? They could have been there for centuries, as far as we know. there's tic tac craft. I described one that I found in the Bible. And if you go through the Bible, there's a lot of sightings, people that are being beamed up by a giant wheel through a beam of light. So mermaids, absolutely. I think that there was probably something seen, if not more than one, seen back in the day, and that's what they called it, a mermaid. It could have been one of these aliens.
Yeah, I got another question in the chat. Tori asks, are there any plans to further explore the ocean, specifically relating to USOs?
I think so, because our government is planning on, the Congress said they're planning on focusing on water sightings. And the one congresswoman, I was hoping to hear from her. I forgot what her name was. She asked a question in the last hearing, and she said, how come we're not hearing any more about water sightings, and somebody should be researching this? And I thought, oh, okay. So I looked her up online and sent her my book. So I called Washington, D.C., talked to her staff, and he goes, oh, absolutely, she'd love your book. And I sent her a copy of the book. So hopefully there will be more research. I think there was a lot of, we're far and few in between. Carl Feint and I spoke a lot. Every time I'd see him at the symposium, he was great. He'd sit at the bar and he'd go, oh, I'll buy you a beer. I mean, back and forth. And I mean, we just sat and we would talk forever. I think like Philip Mantle, there were very few people that have researched the water, and it's crazy because 70% of the earth is covered by water, and there's just few of us out there that think about the sightings in the water, but we should be focusing on that. That's where the videos are coming from. The Navy pilots, 70% of our earth is water. Why are we not focusing on what's going on underwater? Because it's too deep, it's not friendly. We have limited resources to get underwater. It's expensive to try. I mean, dive equipment is expensive. You've got limited visibility. You've got limited depth that you can go. Then you try and rent one of these ROVs, and those are very expensive. You get around the areas that some of this stuff has been reported, and they lose control of them. And I've heard that happen too, to where they lose a signal the moment they get down below 100 feet. The one over by Malibu, forgot who was telling me that they did some research on that. The moment they get down to 100 feet, they totally lose control of this thing and bring it back up. Well, these things are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, our access, I'm sure the government's got access, but what are you going to do when, like the one witness said that they had hid, they used a camouflage electromagnetic net to hide things off of the coast of California. We got people that lost their lives just trying to go 2.5 miles deep to look at the Titanic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good place to hide. It's not human friendly.
Yeah, it's perfect. If you want to stay away from those deadly humans, it's a great place. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I got a few people saying great presentation, excellent speaker in that. So I got some few comments on that. But
Oh, thank you.
we only got a couple minutes left. You got questions for Debbie? Now's the time to ask them. And then I noticed too, there's one of your last slides is like a drawing in the lower right corner, a cylinder with a couple like rings wrapped around it. And I thought that actually looked a lot like the quote unquote tic tac from the famous video, but because the tic tac didn't always look completely tic tac. It should almost look like it had some sort of arms or wings on or something. So one of your pictures, one of the drawings actually kind of reminded me of that too.
Well, we've had tic tac sightings here. And it's kind of funny, the Mississippi River going from the St. Louis area to Illinois. We had in 2011, there was this young man that had his cell phone, and as they were crossing the bridge, this tic tac was low. He just put his cell phone up there and just went click, 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 click. I mean, he got like 9 pictures, and it's it's probably on our website of one of those. Last year and let's see, the end of 2022, let's see, wait a minute, the end of 2022 and beginning of 2023, in the same area, 2 different police officers saw a tic tac. One of them was just moving. One was stopped. The cop was stopped at a light and saw this tic tac low altitude, huge thing go by. Another one was shooting radar and sitting in a parking lot and saw one go by. In 2000 and would have been 11 or 12, we had a lot of activity with that. My husband was going to pick up a part for his boat and was just going down the area highway, probably 3 miles from here. And he came home all shook up and he goes, okay, this is your thing. This is what you do. He said, I'm just driving down the road and this thing looked like a missile. And he said, it just like what he said was like going right, right by me. And he said, I sped up to try and see it. And finally, he said, it was so fast. And he said it was barely above the treetops. And he said it was probably, like a bigger around than a car and long and white and had nothing on it. And so my husband saw a tic tac, but that's, just right there. There's 4 sightings of these things in the last 7, 8, even less than that years, 6 years from right here in my area, just right over, within 10 miles of me.
Yeah, cool. So we're going to wrap up in a few minutes, but Tori's got a question, then I want Darlene to get her question in too. We'll go to Tori next, and then after that, we'll go to Darlene.
Debbie, do any of the underwater sightings, could they possibly have any connection to nuclear testing or nuclear facilities?
You mean the underwater? Oh, the underwater facilities, like what was picked up on Google Earth, or?
Well, just any type of nuclear bomb testing or any facilities that might be off the coast.
Um,
Has
I know
anybody
that,
done any studies on that?
no, and I know that you're not going to do too much of nuclear testing right off of the coast where all these things are. These are the places where these people are being taken are right between Catalina Island and Malibu for one. That's close. I think it took us an hour and 15 minutes by boat to get to Catalina Island from Dana Point. The things there in Puerto Rico right off the coast, you've got so many little islands and everything going on. I know there's no any kind of nuclear testing there. There's too many little islands and too much, cruise ships and everything else. A lot of the nuclear testing was that like Canary Islands off of the Pacific, way over there. And I don't think they do that in the water anymore. Most of the nuclear testing was done, they keep saying Nevada, but I know a lot of it was done near Tucson, Arizona, because I grew up at Safford, Arizona. And in 2nd grade, I can remember that we couldn't go outside and play several times. They say there was a radioactive cloud going over, so we had to stay inside. So we're all the doors open and the teacher and all of us kids were looking up to see if we could see this radioactive cloud that they were testing in Tucson area. And then school lets out 3-4 hours later and we all walk home. I'm surprised I have hair. So I think they don't really test in the water, especially these are coastal areas. Most of these sightings are seen by people right off the coast.
Cool. Darlene's got a question, our last question of the day. Darlene, let us have it.
Debbie, what is your email address again to contact you?
Oh, okay. Easy to remember. MUFON, MUFON, of course. Diver, like scuba diver, DIVER, @gmail.com.
Thank you, and great presentation.
Oh, thank you. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me. It might take me a little. I'm leaving here and then going downstairs. There's a Toys for Tots party going on. And so I've already taken all the toys that we bought down there. And then I'm going to meet my husband down there, but they're trying to gather toys and money for Toys for Tots for Christmas. There's a charity event going on. So I probably won't be home for a couple hours, and then I'll answer my emails when I get home.
Cool. Want to thank you very much, Debbie. Let's all give Debbie a big round of applause. I'm asking you all to unmute. So great
Oh,
way to
thank
end
you.
up 2024. So thank you. So last meeting of the year. So thank you all for a great 2024. Looking forward to 2025. Next year, What's Up in Minnesota, the year in review. And we got, great stuff. Scott Walters. So, but again, thank you, Debbie Ziegelmeyer. Give her a big round of applause again for a great meeting.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank
If you
you.
need me again, you need me again next year. I got other presentations and I can help you out again because I saw on your website that you have trouble finding speakers. So
Yeah, that'd be great. We could definitely go for another one. So, all right, cool. Well, take care, everybody. Have a wonderful end of 2024, and we'll see you next year. We are out of here. Bye-bye.